After a 3 billion-mile journey that's taken almost 10 years, an unmanned NASA spacecraft has hurtled past the planet of Pluto and sent a message to Earth telling scientists that it survived its close encounter with the dwarf planet. Later today, it's expected to send back photographs, the first of their kind, which should reveal details of Pluto never seen before. Our science editor David Shukman sent this report from Mission Control in Maryland. Finally, this is a giant hogweed, and it's been dubbed the most dangerous plant in Britain. So far this summer, 5 children have suffered serious burns from the plant. It contains chemicals that diminish the body's natural protection from UV light. Our correspondent Judith Moritz has more. A near total eclipse of the sun tomorrow. The rare spectacle happens at around 9:30 in the morning, but the extent to which you will see it will depend on where you are and, of course, the weather. The last time there was a total eclipse was in 1999, as our science editor David Shukman explains. In December last year, a 2-year-old boy fell ill and died in a remote village in Guinea. Just days later, so did his 3-year-old sister and their pregnant mother. It was the start of the Ebola outbreak in West Africa that has since killed more than 5,000 people and infected many more. Our global health correspondent, Tulip Mazumda, has been to the remote village in Guinea's Gekedou province, where it all started. London's airspace. For a time this afternoon, no planes were able to land or take off at Heathrow or Stansted, and all departures were suspended at Gatwick. London City Airport and Luton were also badly affected, and many airports across the UK reported delays. Air traffic control says the computer problems have been resolved, but tonight there are still delays and cancellations. Our correspondent Daniel Bircher has more details. Water companies in England and Wales have been ordered to cut bills by an average of 5% in real terms over the next 5 years. They'll still be allowed to add on inflation, but consumer groups have welcomed the move. Our industry correspondent John Moylan is at a water treatment plant in Berkshire. John. It was a moment of humanity amidst the horror of war, the 1914 Christmas Day truce on the battlefields of the Western Front, when British and German soldiers laid down their arms and played football in no man's land. A century later, Prince William has helped to unveil a memorial to mark the event. Natalie Perks reports. Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The oil giant BP is cutting 300 jobs from its North Sea operations, with industry bosses and unions warning that there could be many more job cuts to come. The company is blaming falling oil prices, which have halved in recent months, and tougher market conditions. Several other companies are also struggling, and the Scottish Government is calling on Westminster to reduce taxes on the oil industry. In December last year, a 2-year-old boy fell ill and died in a remote village in Guinea. Just days later, so did his 3-year-old sister and their pregnant mother. It was the start of the Ebola outbreak in West Africa that has since killed more than 5,000 people and infected many more. Our global health correspondent Tulip Mazumda has been to the remote village in Guinea's Gekedou province, where it all started. Most of London's airspace. For a time this afternoon, no planes were able to land or take off at Heathrow or Stansted, and all departures were suspended at Gatwick. London City Airport and Luton were also badly affected, and many airports across the UK reported delays. Air traffic control says the computer problems have been resolved, but tonight there are still delays and cancellations. Our correspondent Daniel Bircher has more details. Water companies in England and Wales have been ordered to cut bills by an average of 5% in real terms over the next 5 years. They'll still be allowed to add on inflation, but consumer groups have welcomed the move. Our industry correspondent John Moylan is at a water treatment plant in Berkshire. John. Now, it was a moment of humanity amidst the horror of war, the 1914 Christmas Day truce on the battlefields of the Western Front, when British and German soldiers laid down their arms and played football in no man's land. A century later, Prince William has helped to unveil a memorial to mark the event. Natalie Perks reports. Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The oil giant BP is cutting 300 jobs from its North Sea operations, with industry bosses and unions warning that there could be many more job cuts to come. The company is blaming falling oil prices, which have halved in recent months, and tougher market conditions. Several other companies are also struggling, and the Scottish Government is calling on Westminster to reduce taxes on the oil industry. James Cook sent this report from Aberdeen. It's Britain's biggest retailer, used by millions of customers, and until recently it was one of the great corporate success stories of the past decade. But now the company's announced big changes to try to revitalise its flagging business. It's closing 43 existing unprofitable stores and shelving plans for 49 larger supermarkets. But how will this U-turn affect the communities where they were going to build them? Our correspondent Emma Simpson sent this report from Dartford. Actors were nominated this afternoon. Benedict Cumberbatch and Keira Knightley have been chosen for their roles in The Imitation Game. Eddie Redmayne and Felicity Jones, who plays Stephen Hawking and his wife in The Theory of Everything, have also been nominated, as has Rosamund Pike for her role in Gone Girl. Our arts editor Will Gompertz looks at the secret of their success. Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. Two men killed in anti-terror raids in Belgium yesterday were hours away from carrying out a plot to kill policemen, according to the authorities. Weapons, money, false papers and police uniforms were found during the raids in the town of Verviers. Today, more than 25 people were arrested in anti-terror raids in France, Germany and Belgium as police tried to thwart more attacks by people with links to Islamic extremists. But the police agency Europol has warned that their sophisticated methods are making it extremely difficult to stop every attack. From Brussels, Robert Hall reports. The number of people waiting more than 4 hours in accident and emergency departments in Wales and Northern Ireland rose last month. In England, hospitals improved but still missed their target again of seeing 95% of patients within 4 hours. The figure in Wales was 81% in December, the worst waiting times in 5 years. Northern Ireland fared even worse, with just under 77%. In England, around 90% of patients were seen within the recommended time, an improvement, but still below target. In a moment, our health correspondent Branwen Jeffries reports on efforts to improve the situation. But first, Hal Griffith on the problems in Wales. £8 million, and its mission more than a decade ago was to land on Mars. But it disappeared in December 2003 as it neared the red planet, from where it was supposed to start transmitting data back to Earth once it had landed, and it hadn't been heard from since. But today, scientists announced that they have found it. Here it is, these grainy images showing it on the surface of Mars, just a couple of miles from its intended landing site. Our science editor David Shookman reports. St Peter's Seminary near Glasgow. It was built in the 1960s to train Catholic priests and was widely considered to be one of the most important examples of modernist architecture in Scotland. And this is what it's like today. Now, should shops be allowed to open for longer on Sundays? The government thinks they should, and it's about to unveil new proposals for England and Wales to allow that to happen. Current laws allow smaller shops to open all day, but large stores can only open their doors for a maximum of 6 hours. In his budget tomorrow, the Chancellor will give elected mayors and councils powers to decide what's right for their area. Our correspondent John Kay has been gauging reaction in Bristol, and he joins us now. John. Barclays Bank has fired its chief executive, Anthony Jenkins, after less than 3 years in charge. It's understood that the board thought the pace of cost-cutting was too slow and that the bank's investment arm wasn't performing well enough. Mr. Jenkins is being replaced temporarily by the bank's new chairman. Here's our business editor, Kamal Ahmed. Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. A former SS guard at the Nazi death camp Auschwitz has been found guilty of facilitating the murder of 300,000 people. 94-year-old Oskar Gröning was known as the bookkeeper of Auschwitz. His job was to count the money confiscated from prisoners as they arrived at the camp. A court in Germany sentenced him to 4 years in prison at the end of what's expected to be one of the last Holocaust trials. Well, our correspondent Caroline Wyatt is in Lüneburg, where his trial took place. Caroline. Now, caught on camera by an unmanned NASA spacecraft that's travelled 3 billion miles to get there, this is the most detailed image ever seen of the planet Pluto. And there were celebrations at Mission Control this morning when the spacecraft sent a message to Earth telling scientists that it had survived its close encounter with the dwarf planet. Now scientists are waiting for even more detailed images of the last truly unexplored world in the solar system. Our science editor David Shookman is at Mission Control in Maryland. David. Good evening. Confidential letters written by Prince Charles to Tony Blair and his ministers when Labour were in government have been published after a 10-year legal battle by The Guardian newspaper. The letters to 7 government departments cover a wide range of subjects, including badger culling and herbal medicine. In one letter to the Prime Minister, Prince Charles said the armed forces were being asked to do a challenging job without the necessary resources. Clarence House says publishing the letters will only inhibit the Prince's ability to express concerns. Here's our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell. In Nepal, hundreds of thousands of people have spent another night out in the open after the second major earthquake in less than 3 weeks. 76 people are known to have died yesterday, but that figure is expected to rise. The latest earthquake centred on several districts in the foothills of the Himalayas. The town of Chutara, where several people have been killed, was already a hub for rescuers and for aid after the first earthquake. Our South Asia correspondent Justin Rolat is there. A military coup is underway in Burundi. There has been heavy gunfire in the capital, Bujumbura, and at least 50,000 civilians have fled the small landlocked country. The East African nation was affected by the overspill of the Rwandan genocide in 1994, but also had its own civil war in which more than 300,000 people were killed. Since then, it has had a decade of relative calm, but the latest protests were sparked by the president's decision to seek a third term in office. It triggered both violence and international condemnation. Maud Julien is in the capital, Bujumbura. Her report contains some images you may find distressing. Good evening. 12 members of the same family from Bradford are missing after they failed to return from a pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia. The 3 sisters and their 9 children, aged between 3 and 15, were supposed to fly home 4 days ago. A lawyer representing the women's husbands says the most probable of the possibilities is that they have travelled to Syria to join Islamic State. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning reports. Joining Islamic extremists, the mother of a 25-year-old British man killed last night in Kenya fighting for Al-Shabaab has told the BBC that her world fell apart when she heard the news. In an exclusive interview, Sally Evans says she had not heard from her son Thomas, who converted to Islam, since December. And she spoke of her anger at members of the local community who she blames for radicalising him. Here's our security correspondent Gordon Carrera. Fled fighting in the north of the country as Islamic State fighters struggled to hold a key town on the border with Turkey. It's the latest in a series of setbacks for the jihadis in northern Syria. Kurdish forces, supported by US airstrikes, closed in on the town of Tal Abyad from the west and east, cutting off a vital supply line to the extremist stronghold of Raqqa. The latest reports from the Kurdish forces claim they have now taken the key border town. Our correspondent Paul Wood sent this report from the border. Of Magna Carta, a founding document of Western democracy, has been celebrated by the Queen and thousands of guests beside the River Thames in Surrey. It originated as a peace treaty between King John and his barons. He sealed it in 1215 at Runnymede, where today's ceremony took place. Magna Carta reined in the powers of the monarch, stating that they, like everyone else, were subject to the rule of law. It's widely recognised as the first charter protecting human rights and freedoms. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell was at the ceremony and sent this report. Good evening. Thousands of holidaymakers are leaving Tunisia after the British government warned that another terror attack is highly likely. The Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, said the government now had a better picture of the emerging scale of the threat, and it was too big a risk for Britons to stay in the country. It comes 2 weeks after a gunman killed 38 tourists in Sousse, most of them British. Denmark and Ireland have now also advised their citizens to leave. Our correspondent Ola Girin is in Tunisia for us now. Ola. 75 years ago today, the RAF launched attacks against German fighter aircraft off the English coast. It was the beginning of what became known as the Battle of Britain, the first significant Allied victory against the Nazis. Today, Spitfires and Hurricanes flew over Buckingham Palace to mark the anniversary. The Queen and other members of the royal family watched on from the balcony, as Nick Heim reports.